When was your last I gotta get out of here moment? It was years ago when I was in grade school. My parents used to get into arguments all the time, especially when my dad was drinking. They'd start yelling, and that would turn into actual fights. At this time, we were living in a small trailer, and the room I shared with all three of my siblings was at one end of the trailer near the back door. So my dad comes home drunk, mom is pissed and starts yelling, and it escalates from there. Being in a small trailer, everything sounds so close, and as the oldest of four, I felt the need to protect my siblings, but I didn't know what to do. After a while, my mom starts screaming my name at the top of her lungs, and I can still hear my dad screaming too. And I knew that I needed to get myself and my siblings out of there ASAP. I ushered them out of the room, down the hallway, and out the back door, and told them to head to our aunt's place, who lived a few trailers down. My mom was still screaming for me, and all I needed to do was yell, "I got them out, Mom, we're leaving," before also going out the back to my aunt's. I don't recall ever being that scared. Cops came, they both went to prison and were both out in a couple of days and acted like nothing ever happened. A few years ago, I brought the incident up to my mom. I told her that I thought she was screaming at me to get my siblings out of the house, and that's why I had. She told me she was screaming my name because she was scared and wanted help and didn't know who else to call for. I felt so bad because I didn't help her, but there's not really much I could have done. Yikes, that sounds and must have been chaotic and horrifying. Story 2. I gave my ex a ride to his court hearing for striking my daughter. I pointed out to him inside that there was a sign that said no cell phones and that I would run our phones out to the car and right back. I felt like my heart was going to break my sternum, and I had tunnel vision as I called my sister and told her I needed her and her husband to come with their pickup truck to my house right now because I had a small window to get as much of my daughter's and my possessions out of my house before he was released from court. Just as we were wrapping up, I saw him running down the street like Usain Bolt right for me. I yelled for them to drop what they had and get in the trunk and go. Just as I closed my car door, he runs up and tries to break it so it could open. I fumbled with my keys to get the engine started. He then stands in front of my car, blocking my path. I pushed aside my yearning to confront him over and threw it in reverse and stepped the gas pedal down the block to the next street. I'd like to say things got better after that, but that was just the beginning of the worst year of my life. Now I'm all past that and living a much better life. Wow, sounds like one of those thriller scenes in Hollywood movies. Takes a lot of guts, probably a bit of luck too. Story 3. I pulled into a gas station to fill up my car at 4 a.m. on the way to work. The station was well lit and actually pretty busy, so I didn't feel unsafe. I pulled up next to a pump, went out, and just when I put the nozzle in, I heard someone trying to get my attention. I turned, and it was a guy who had been leaning against the wall of the station when I pulled in. There was a van nearby. He asked if I could call his girlfriend to come pick him up. I called one number and the voice mailbox was full. He gave me a second number. Mailbox is also full. Then he asked if I had a jumper cable and if he could give me a jump. I agreed, thinking the van he was nearby was his vehicle. Then after I agree, he tells me the story of how he got there. According to him, his car had broken down at another gas station up the street. He said it was closed, so he couldn't get any help, so he borrowed a bike from someone and rode it down to this gas station. Then he went into the gas station to leave the bike there. As soon as he started walking away, my brain started racing and pointing out all the things that didn't add up about this story. First, all I could imagine in those voicemail boxes were a bunch of people going, "Your boyfriend is stuck at the gas station." Then I thought about how he would legitimately borrow a bike from someone at a closed gas station in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter. At that point, I decided it was time to get out of there. Thankfully, I hadn't pumped any gas yet, so I quickly put it back on the pump, got into my car, and tore it out of there. I actually felt a little bad because what if he actually needed help? But then I reminded myself about him borrowing a bike in that situation, how he was trying to get me to a dark, secluded secondary location. Yeah, her instincts saved her that night. Story 4. I was walking into a store in a mall. It was after dark, but like your gas station, it was busy and I felt fairly safe. That's when a guy got my attention. He said his car had broken down on the interstate at this spot about 10 miles outside of town, and that he needed a ride back to it. It would have been a very dark location, and at that point in the evening, there wouldn't have been much traffic. At first, I started going along with it and even got my car keys back out, then my gut took over. I've never had such a strong reaction before, but I got this overpowering feeling that he was trying to get me out into the middle of nowhere so he could get something from me. It was so strong that I felt like I'd been given a zap by an electric fence. I did a 180 and told him that sorry, I had somewhere to be and that if he's in trouble, he should call the police. He started shouting at me about what a bad day he'd had, that his wife was pregnant, and that he just needed one person to be kind for once. Then he stomped away. I went into the store and was completely fine. Then when I got back home, the fear set in. I got the shakes and had a very strong feeling that something bad would have happened to me if I had gone with him. It was a little difficult to fall asleep that night. So, to the dude who approached me, wherever you are now, if you were legit and in trouble, I'm sorry. I hope you made it to your car, but I don't feel all that bad about it. Story 5. I was visiting London and just got out of the sports bar by myself at 3 a.m., tipsy. I decided to walk from the bar near Leicester Square to my hotel near King's Cross, despite not knowing exactly where I am or how to get to the hotel. So I start walking in a direction, and within a minute, I'm walking down a rather wide shopping street when I see two bald guys coming the other way, both pretty much built brick and looking like they want to start a fight. They hadn't spotted me yet, but one guy suddenly walked to the side of the street and just flat out punched the steel grate in front of a shop entrance. I pretty much did a straight 180, double-timed it back to the bar and asked the nice bouncers to get me a cab. Cab drops me off in front of the hotel and I go to bed. Story 6. Only ever been to Poughkeepsie once. My buddies and I went to a Yankee game, got way too intoxicated afterwards and missed the last train back to Beacon. Decided to take a cab back to Beacon instead. The cab driver said he knew where it was without GPS. About 90 minutes into the ride, my friend asked me, "Dude, where are we?" I realized that I had no clue. Come to find out that the dude took us to Poughkeepsie. I got into an argument with the driver, telling him he took us to the wrong place and I demanded he take us to Beacon. When he refused, I refused to pay and got out of the cab. The driver dropped all of us stranded in Poughkeepsie at like 3 or 4 in the morning. The whole thing was dumb. But the streets of Poughkeepsie at night did not feel cozy or safe. Groups of sketchy-looking people walking around, and I remember many times preparing to defend myself as the groups approached us. Luckily, we got picked up by another very annoyed friend. Story 7. Happened a few hours ago. I was in the park with my younger brother just playing football and having a nice time. Suddenly, I see a man looking over in our direction. However, I can't be too sure because I don't have my glasses, and I don't want to scare myself for no reason. He's carrying an orange bag, so it's easy to see him. I ignore him and start walking around randomly, not following the path, backtracking, just not walking logically, if that makes sense, kicking the ball to each other. The last time I went to this park on the 1st, a man of the same build and ethnicity followed me, so I felt myself getting paranoid. This man kept his distance, but for instance, we went into the basketball area, and he would come to the entrance and lean against the gate just watching us. He could go behind the trees. It was clear he knew his way around this park, and he followed us, which I wouldn't notice if it wasn't for his bag. I wanted to confront him, but I was with my younger brother and I didn't want to cause trouble. I wasn't really scared, but more angry and frustrated. The man suddenly starts getting braver and walking faster towards us, so we decide to quickly run home even though we were only out for like 15 minutes. Story 8. When I first moved to where I'm living now, it's across the river from a college town city with a main street that's littered with restaurants and bars. So one night, a couple friends and I went out and decided to bar hop. Nothing big, just wanted to check out the different places. Walked into one hole in the wall joint with a handful of people in there. Everybody's head turned and looked at us like we were from another planet. Weird vibe immediately. Bartender approaches slowly, asking how we're doing and what he can get us. We order our round of drinks and the bartender very slowly says, "Is that all?" Again, weird vibe, but whatever. Random guy later found out to be the owner, comes and sits next to us and starts chatting us up. Where we're from, what we're doing in the area, if we're quote-unquote cool. Lots of weird conversation starters. At this point, we want out, but our drinks haven't come back yet, so we get our drinks and try to keep to ourselves. Guy keeps asking if he can get us anything at all, off the menu. At this point, I realize that the two women at the other end are doing substance. There's also two large men standing against the wall right behind us, just grilling us. Not wanting to make a scene, we all shared a "let's get out of here" look. Talked amongst ourselves for a minute, finished our drinks as fast as possible, paid, left. The owner was trying to talk to us the entire time we were paying, and making our way to the door, trying to keep us there as the two large men slowly closed in. We got out and said nothing until we reached the other side of the street. Story 9. My ex-best friend convinced me to go to a concert with her. I told her I couldn't because I had a long drive the next morning and didn't want to waste gas or go to bed too late, and she said it was fine. She would drive and would get me home right after the concert. So we went to the concert, it was fine, and I was ready to go home, but she told me she wanted to go to an afterparty with the band because her crush would be there. I agreed because she really wanted to get with this guy, and the chances of it happening seemed high, and I wanted her to be happy. Turns out the after party was at a decent hotel. Kids were straight up walking in, and it was really obvious what was going on. The receptionist was eyeing everyone, but nobody cared. My friend and I got to the room, and we were the only girls there, around 40 tipsy college guys and 2 girls. I'd never experienced being stared at like that until that moment. I told her we had to go, but she was focused on staying with the crush. I couldn't convince her, so I called my mom, the most awkward phone conversation of my life, and had her pick me up. Turns out the receptionist called the cops soon after I left, and the party got broken up. I think some people got charged. Story 10. Our mobile home was old, dirty, and falling apart from the attempted quote-unquote fixes that my stepfather did. My mom was mostly absent because she was a nurse and worked nights. Our trailer always had flea infestations, and my sister and I had heads full of lice. My mom decided to homeschool us. My stepfather never worked a day while my mom was alive, so the money was always tight. Not to mention he would spend what little money was left over after groceries on his bad habit. I'm so ashamed of my childhood that I avoid all topics about growing up with other people. My own husband didn't know about the specifics of my childhood or where I lived for a very long time. My sister and brother still act like they're from the trailer park that we grew up in and even go back there when they can. They don't see anything wrong with the way we grew up. When my twin and I graduated in high school, my mother passed away unexpectedly, and we left that place for my grandmother's house. She was clean and her house was big. She sent us to private schools where we had to learn how to act around other people in a normal way. Story 11. A few years back, I went to a festival with a friend of my brother's. I'd met the guy a few times before, didn't know much about him besides the fact he was an old hippie type. I was in college at the time and didn't have more than $50 to my name, so I did volunteer work for the festival in exchange for my ticket. This involved setting up what were essentially electrical power poles and stringing high-tension steel wire between them for the purpose of attaching a canvas shade covering. When we finished that work, we moved on to other tasks like painting, finishing up ticketing booths, etc. At the end of the work one day, we went down to the river to float in some inner tubes and relax. And this is where the vibe changed, and fast. He kept saying off and dark remarks that were irrelevant to the current conversation. Things like, once you pass away, that's it. There's no reincarnation or anything. Out of the blue. Huge red flags going up. All this shortly after I'd finished the required 20 hours to pay for my ticket. I gave it the night, but the next day we suddenly needed to move camp, and that meant more performance to our stay in the festival. Last chance for in and out with the truck and trips to town. Maybe I'm just worried, but seeing all the heavy machinery the next day and his mood remaining dark and unfriendly, I decided on our last trip to town that day I was out. I had him pull over and let me out right when we got into town with only a backpack of some of my belongings, much of my stuff still at the camp. It took me 2 days to hitchhike home, and thankfully, a kind lady at a small town's general store gave me a blanket to get through a very cold night. I don't regret my experience, even if I was wrong about the situation and just being a paranoid nerd. It taught me that I'm capable of leaving my possessions behind in favor of my safety. Story 12. Last week, I was visiting Los Angeles with my 24-year-old daughter. I had to fill the tank of the rental car. I Googled the cheapest gas and waited in line. There was a homeless man yelling, clearly mentally ill. When we got to the pump was broken. When you fill 10 cents of gas and it stops. It took a full minute to get $1 of gas when the homeless man came up to us. He was yelling, "Now this is a nice car." I grabbed the pump from my daughter and said, "Head out," and we drove off. Funny thing is, my daughter wasn't scared because she was listening to what the man was yelling about. Apparently, the homeless man was being insulted by another driver. The other driver told him not to touch his car. The car was old and the homeless man was making fun of him. "Oh, don't touch this car." That's when he came to our car. "Now this is a nice car. I won't touch this one, but yours is so cheap." So it ended up being pretty funny. I worried for nothing. Story 13. I've been lucky to not have many, but the first one that popped into my head was this party I went to when I was in college. Some friends of mine from high school were renting a house about a half-mile away from my parents' house, and they decided to have a party to break the place in. My boyfriend at the time and I decided to go and just walk down to my parents afterwards so we wouldn't have to drive anywhere and could both get wasted for once and not have to worry about transportation. It was super convenient for us. Almost as soon as we walked in, I felt like something was off. The vibe felt kind of adversarial and uncomfortable, which was weird because everyone there knew each other and no one had historically had an issue with anyone else. Something just told me to leave. We stayed for about an hour and then walked down the hill, a small mountain, to my parents and went to watch movies in their guest house. About an hour later, both of our phones started blowing up with frantic phone calls from the party. Apparently, a fight had broken out between two guys who were actually pretty good friends. Everyone had run out onto the lawn screaming. The neighbors had called the cops, and since the majority of the people there were college students, they needed somewhere to go. So I walked downstairs, tell my parents what happened, and let them know that we're basically about to provide shelter to about 25 tipsy people fleeing through the woods toward our house. What's bad about this is that the most direct path to my house lands at a 20-foot cliff rock face drop off, so we had to get ladders and flashlights and direct all these people onto the deck on our guest house porch safely. It was dangerous, stressful, and they're all lucky that my boyfriend and I decided to go home and not drink too much that night, and that my parents were cool with helping them all out. Story 14. After earning my degree in film from a 2-year college, a professor that I and many other students look up to asked me to travel with him to Colombia to finish a documentary he was working on. Having traveled with him internationally in the past for class trips, I thought it would be a great opportunity. It was an all-expense paid trip, so how could I not? So I traveled from New York to South America all by myself, and once I got there, he gave me a tour of our Airbnb that went like this. So here's the kitchen, office, living room, bathroom, and bedroom. There's just one bed. I hope that's okay. I tried to keep cool and slept head to toe the first night. The next morning, he sits me down to talk, and after his long intro, he finally gets to the point. He asked that the next part stay between us and started with, "So I've only ever been with my wife." That was the moment that all the hairs on my body stood up, and I was like, I need to get out of here. So that evening, I told him that while I was flattered, I wasn't interested and thought it was unfair for him to do that to me. I tried to be polite because I didn't know what to expect at that point. He backpedaled the entire time, all of which I have an audio recording of, and I slept on an armchair in the living room the rest of the stay. Also, for reference, my professor looked like a small Venezuelan Gandalf, long white beard and all. I also had a family friend that lived in the city, so he picked me up last night and took me to the airport. I've never felt so safe in my life. Alright, so if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 15. A girl I'd gone on a couple of dates with invited me and several of her friends to a bar to celebrate her birthday. Among them were two bros I'd never met before. They got tipsy pretty fast and were being really loud enough that it was obviously annoying the other bar patrons. The bros decided to do a shot, and after gulping them down, one let out a loud "woo." A random bar patron gave a mocking "woo" back at him, and this obviously pissed off the bros, but for the moment they didn't do anything and just stayed quiet and stewed on it. Then they decided to do another shot. After doing the shot this time, instead of a "woo," one of the brothers looked at the bar patron and yelled out "douche." In that instance, I shot out of my chair to walk out of the bar. There was no way I was going to let these tipsy bros drag me into some altercation by proxy for no reason. The thing was, at least 2 other members of our group had the exact same plan, so on the word douche, the 3 of us stood up in unison and walked out of the bar without a word to anyone until we got outside. The bar has big glass windows in front, so we could see that the 2 bros were suddenly quite deflated that a third of what they must assume was their crew had just bailed on them. The birthday girl played peacemaker and went to apologize to the bar patron, which he was gracious about. The rest of the group just left a few minutes after we did with no further incident. I never dated that girl again. Story 16. Lived with my brother for a few years after high school. He wasn't the most mentally healthy person. He wasn't dangerous to anyone but himself, not physically or even verbally violent with anyone, but he's always been kind of a slob. When I moved in, I cleaned his house and I did my best to keep it clean. Fast forward about 2 years later and our lives have gotten pretty bad. His business is a small video game card shop that he owns and operates. It's a buy-sell trade place, so he gets a lot of inventory, more than he can fit in his store. You'd think having a ton of nerdy gadgets in your house would be awesome until you're living in a real-life episode of Hoarders. That last year there, things got to be pretty bad. My girlfriend betrayed and left me. I was working a dead-end job. We were living with 2 heavy substance users. Our house was absolutely infested with fleas, gnats, mice, and other insects. We didn't have trash pickup, and the basement was literally full of garbage bags that the mice had made their home. Our living conditions had become uninhabitable. We both smoked about 2 packs of cigarettes a day, smoked grass, and played video games constantly, not even because it was fun necessarily. We just needed constant distraction because our reality wasn't something we could even confront, so we just avoided it through any means necessary. One week, which I refer to as the worst week of my life, things came to a head. 2 of my friends passed away. My cat ran away, and my sister and her boyfriend stole our things while we were both away at work one day. We came home with most of the electronics and any spare cash gone. We had to kick her out the next day. One of the hardest things I ever had to do. I'd been helping my sister with her living and job situation for a long time, but that last year I was in no condition to help anyone, not even myself. I'm mentally challenged and have turned every feeling I had into absolute apathy. I didn't care of my relationships, my home, my pets even, my car, nor myself, and everything in my life was rapidly deteriorating. At the end of that week, I had some sort of breakdown. I'm honestly not sure what it was exactly in medical terms, but I'll describe it as best as I can. I was in the kitchen feeling kind of sick. I felt like I needed to eat something. We were both dirt poor and had very little food, so I grabbed a spoonful of peanut butter. As soon as I ate it, I immediately felt very nauseated, and then came the biggest rush of emotion I've ever felt in my life. Everything started spinning. I couldn't speak. I grabbed the countertop and could barely keep my balance. I was able to call out my brother's name right before I just passed out. I remember seeing a face, not one I can describe clearly, but it did seem familiar. Not a good familiar, almost like the feeling when you remember a nightmare. It felt similar to something I experienced on a bad trip once. I fell straight back onto the trash-ridden floor, out cold. I never felt as if I actually lost consciousness, though. It was as if my mind had just gone somewhere else. When I became lucid again, my brother was shaking me, yelling my name. He got me some water and I laid on the floor for a minute, and for the first time in too long, I truly took in my surroundings. The weight of all my mistakes and apathy were finally being realized. My brother wanted me to go to a hospital, but I said no, I just wanted to sleep. The next morning, I was a different person. I called into work and truly looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized myself. I was covered in insect bites, my teeth were stained yellow, and my skin looked pale. How long has it been since I even showered? And that's when I had my biggest, I need to get out of here right now, moment. The next week was difficult. I was scared I was going to faint again. I called an old friend from high school who had said he needed a roommate on Facebook not too long ago. Within a couple of weeks, I was out of there. It's been 2 years since I moved out of there. I'm 24 now. My brother is doing a little better. His house is still very cluttered and messy, but no longer infested. I worry about him, but I'm not sure what to do. My sister has been clean for almost 2 years now. She has a fiance, a job as a server, and a beautiful baby boy who I am proud to be an uncle to. And I am a different person entirely. My house is very clean. I'm living with a few friends that I grew up with, and we all get along great. I have a routine. I take care of myself. I quit smoking. I eat healthy. I cook myself fresh food and vegetables. I have a good job and have an interview in 2 days for an even better job. I have more money in my savings account than I ever have. I was able to recently buy a new car, a nice one. I have a great credit score and a lovely girlfriend. I keep myself very busy and I'm overall a productive person. I don't use any substances other than caffeine. I'm working on becoming a substance misuse counselor. But most importantly, I'm healthy. I take care of myself and my life now, and when I think about my life 2 or 3 years ago, I can't believe I used to be that person. I still can't explain my breakdown. I think that the stress, the grief, and substance use was just literally making me insane. My thoughts back then didn't make any sense. I was losing my mind. And I'm thankful for my new life every single day. I'm sorry this has been so long, but I enjoy telling this story and I felt it was relevant to the post. I have a great sense of pride for all that I overcame and I'm excited to see what the future will bring. So if you're struggling right now, don't give up. I never imagined my life would become what it is today. It's hard for people to relate to someone who just has a degree and hasn't actually lived it, you know? Story 17. I lost my passport in a train station in Moscow. I made the mistake of going and asking someone official if they had one handed in. The person made a call and the next minute I was escorted by several armed cops to a dodgy-looking police station under or behind the train station. They were all drinking and smoking cigarettes when they began firing questions at me. Are you American? No. Where's your visa? In my passport, that's why I'm here. Who knows you're here? Their tone quickly shifted and they began demanding money from me. Then one of them instructed me to follow him through a door deeper into the station. Seizing the moment, I did a quick 180, bolted back through the door and jumped on the nearest train. I made my way to my country's embassy where I was issued an emergency passport and flown out the next day. Story 18. My parents divorced when I was young and their time with me was split down the middle week by week. My mom constantly made excuses why she couldn't take me for the week. This went on for years. Examples include going on a road trip with her new boyfriend in his 18-wheeler, quote-unquote, working too much, and other excuses. When she did take me, we were constantly moving houses, staying at her other new boyfriend's houses with me sleeping on the living room floor with just a pillow, while she was in his bedroom with the door shut right by the living room. I didn't have a bed or a room for almost 3 years. When I was in high school, we were living in an insulated shed behind my older sister's house, no lie, with no bathroom and just one bed and a couch. She lost her license, she lost her job, and lost her car. So I had to rely on my very understanding friends to get me places. One night, I walked into my sister's house to go to the bathroom, and there I saw my mom passed out on the toilet from substance misuse. I had to pick her up and take her to her bed. I tried talking to her about it the next day, and she acted like I just accused her of something. She yelled at me and called me names and that she couldn't believe that I would do this to her. As a high schooler who was always naive towards my mom, I was super confused as to why I was getting blamed for what had happened the night before. I finally smartened up, packed up the little that I had, and walked to my dad's house. This was 10 years ago. About 5 years ago is when I cut all communication with that side of my family. They kept acting like nothing was wrong and that she didn't do anything. She never once apologized, and I insisted I was to blame. So naturally, I put the blame on myself, but then I realized that the child is not supposed to be the parent. It wasn't my job to fix her. She should have provided for me, and she didn't do that. I still think about that situation a lot when talking to my youth students, and it helps me give them some guidance. Never, ever blame yourself for your parents' shortcomings. Story 19. My friend and I were out drinking, and she met the cutest guy we've ever seen. I was dating someone else, so I was just there for fun and moral support. He ends up inviting us over. I wasn't about to let her go alone, so I tag along and plan on sleeping on his couch. His roommate is with him, and I make it very clear from the get-go I am not interested. We get in the car, and he starts driving. We're in the car for a while, and neither of us recognize where we are. Once arriving at their apartment, I realize their couch is covered in random sheet, and there is just enough space for me to sit. They have a cat, and his litter box is just chilling in the living room and hasn't been cleaned in God knows how long. My feet were hurting from wearing heels, and the guy tried to help his roommate out by trying to sell me on using his spa stuff to soak my feet and maybe get a massage. I held firm on the couch. It's 3 a.m. and there's nowhere for me to sleep, so I check to see how far we are from home. We're 40 minutes from home, and an Uber costs $50. I'm not paying for this. This was her adventure, so I decided to wait until the morning. The roommate invites me to watch a movie. I take the bed, and he takes the floor. He puts on Transformers to watch. Needless to say, I fell asleep quickly. I wake up early and hound my roommate to wake up so we can hightail it out of there. Our Uber is over 10 minutes away, and I'm going to mess in my pants. I considered paying the Uber driver to stop at a Walgreens because I didn't think I'd make it all the way home. Thankfully, he arrived soon, and I made it home without passing out, and she definitely paid for the Uber home. Story 20. Our dog was diagnosed with illness last August, and within a month, he had gone to the point of us having to put him down. It's the first time I've ever made that decision, and the fact that everything happened so quickly made things so much harder than I ever imagined it would be. We knew it was insane, but he took a steep dive in the last 12 hours. Even with the knowledge that he was sick, it happened very quickly. We got home from the vet just kind of numb. I sat on the couch just a few hours before he was sitting happily, surrounded by his collar, food bowl, toys, tons of pictures of him. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I could not be in that room anymore. I told my wife that I needed to take a walk and went out to the back field where he loved to roll, passing his favorite spots on the property. I finally got to the field and just collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I probably spent 45 minutes laying on the ground and crying for most of it. Eventually, I went back to the house and everything was still horrible, but the release of emotions at least made it bearable. I still missed the crap out of him. He was a fantastic dog and he should have been around for much longer. That wasn't the end he deserved. Story 21. My sister was beginning to berate me for running away from my problems and not taking her help, despite having spent the last year of my life in therapy and desperately trying to sort myself out. I tried to walk away from her and calmly collect my things. I put my backpack on and turned towards the door. My sister, who has at least 150 pounds on me, grabbed the handle on the top of the backpack and yanked me backwards. She screamed while I cried on the ground. She pushed me into their sliding mirror closet door, shattering it. I figured out to ditch the backpack after she yanked me back to the ground and ran like an Olympic hurdler out of the kitchen, through the backyard, and over the fence. I didn't stop running until I couldn't run because I was dry heaving. Needless to say, she's nothing to me now. Story 22. During Hurricane Harvey, my story is not nearly as harrowing as some, but I live on a lake and right in front of a channel that directs water to the lake when it rains a lot. It's normally empty, but of course this was Harvey, so it just kept rising and rising. I woke up one morning to find flood markers placed along the channel indicating that someone with knowledge of the situation expected it to fill up and overflow, threatening my house. Panicking, I hurriedly piled whatever I could on the counters, wrapped the bottoms of my furniture in plastic, though I knew it likely wouldn't help much, took pictures for insurance, and raced to my mom's house with all of our animals and children in tow. As we left our neighborhood, we encountered a horde of pickup trucks pulling boats, all heading in the same direction we had just escaped. My house did not flood, thank God, but a good chunk of my neighborhood and the surrounding areas did. I didn't even have it that bad, and those were honest to God the most stressful few days of my life so far. I felt so bad for everyone who wasn't as lucky. Story 23. The first time I moved out of the house, I lived with an acquaintance from high school. It was fine for a while until she got fired from her job and she started paying her utility bill later and later. We paid our rent separately, in person, to our landlord. Before this point, we had become good friends. I tried to help her whenever I can. So when she started running behind on utilities, I tried to front the bill as much as I could. I was still working, but not making much either. She would pay me back, but then it got to the point that she just didn't. When we had about 3 months left in our lease, I confronted her and said that while I enjoyed being her roommate, finances were getting tight. I wanted to continue helping her and living with her, but instead of me continuing to pay, we need to set up a budgeting plan and find her a job if we're going to be able to continue to afford our place. She responded immediately by saying that I was a bad friend for not wanting to help her, and that she was tired of not being good enough for me. Then she said she was just going to move out. I was shocked. This was a stark turnaround from our usually respectful and congenial talks, but eventually said okay. I got in touch with our landlord immediately so he could prepare to look for new tenants. That was when he informed me that she owed him over $1,000 in rent. The proceedings after this were less than pleasant. She told me I was being unreasonable when I started packing my furniture within the next week, that she wasn't being serious when she berated me in our previous conversation. By the time I finally got my furniture into storage, there were snot stains on the underside of one of my sitting chairs from her friends, ashes on and in upholstery. Couldn't tell you where I went wrong, but I was glad that I didn't continue trying with that one. Story 24. When I was in high school, my mom booked a trip for the two of us to Egypt. I have very blue eyes, and at the time I had blonde hair. We were with a tour group the whole time, but being post 9/11, security was crazy. We had an armed guard on our tour bus at all times. Every time we went to the hotel, we had to go through the barriers with security checking our passports and the bus. The tour group went to a busy market in Cairo late one afternoon and went to a couple of different places that had perfume, silver jewelry. Everyone in the stores kept commenting about how blue my eyes were and how beautiful they were. Somehow, my mom and I got 10 steps behind the rest of the group. The walkway was so narrow, we were just walking, taking everything in when I began to notice men coming out of the different shops. We had people behind us, next to us, then they're in front of us and closing around us. We were absolutely surrounded. People were reaching out, trying to grab my arms. My mom is trying to fight them off. Then we hear someone shouting in Arabic. One of the security guards who was with our tour was shouting at the group. He had pulled out his concealed weapon and was aiming at the group. They all part and he grabs us and drags us back to the bus. This security guard basically followed my mom and me after that. He was always waiting for us when we left the hotel and was at every place we stopped. That man didn't speak a bit of English, but I can only hope he knows how grateful I am to him. Story 25. Went to a bar that rich people would ride their horses to. My friends and I went to check out a new place. The setup is a tiny bar and tons of benches in the back where everyone just mingles. We soon started talking to an older guy. A while later, a man in his late 30s with a dog that was standing up on a date also starts talking to us. These men will be called older guy, OG, and younger guy, YG, respectively. My friends and I are now hanging out with the two guys that don't know each other. This is important for later. Now, the conversation was odd, but my friends and I wrote it off due to generational differences. OG said that he lived a few houses away if we all wanted to keep hanging out with the bar closing. It was only 9 p.m. and we all thought the others wanted to go, so we agreed. This was mistake number 1. YG tries to have me go in the car with him, but my friend refuses and makes our other male friend go with him. OG gets in the car with us and YG drives in front of the house. Mistake number 2 is not realizing YG is leading us when he didn't know where the house was. So we get to the house and I make a joke about how this is the scene of our murder because of some creepy trees that surrounded the area. There are very expensive cars in front and this house is 3 stories and very large. My gut instinct is giving me signs, but I ignore it. Mistake number 3. The guys put on music and refuse to give us water and only provide more drinks. At this point, we're all very uncomfortable and finally speak to each other about it. As we are speaking, a woman walks in and says, "Who are you?" We point to OG saying we came with him and explain who we are. She says she has no clue who he is, but that she knows YG. We now are running for the door while the OG tries to say she's confused and YG talks to her. We don't even close the door behind us. Turns out all of us had very bad feelings going to that house, but we all ignored it just to go along with things for the sake of the other friends. After that, we always would discuss things before changing plans and always voiced our gut instinct. It was too close of a call if something really bad happened. Clearly, those guys knew each other, and it was all a ploy. And if you learned a thing or two from these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.